Hey, we're so glad that you could join us here on our podcast at Ashland Christian Fellowship. You will notice different voices from gifted men and women as we discuss relevant and encouraging topics. And don't forget to subscribe either to our YouTube channel or Spotify. We hope you enjoy today's topic and that the Lord speaks to you. God bless.
Well, hey guys, welcome back to Verified Podcast. We are super excited to be with you today, and we are super excited that you are here with us as well. I'm joined today by Heather Timmons and Brett Yoder. Heather and Timon? Heather and Timon.
Heather and Timmons.
Heather and Timon. Heather and Brett, thank you so much, guys.
Timon is a cool name, though.
Timon is a cool name.
Heather and Timon.
Yeah, Heather and Timon.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being on here today, and we have quite the topic in front of us today.
Yeah.
Yep.
Are you guys pretty excited for this topic?
I am.
Yeah, I am.
Heather brought
I
like
came
20
prepared.
books.
Well, I've been
Who knows how many scriptures and like 1,000 tabs in her books. I don't even know how we're going to get through it all today, especially because we don't let her talk much on the podcast. Anyways.
Well, Pastor Mark's not here.
Pastor Mark's not here today, so.
Oh, no.
Oh.
No, I'm not saying that.
Did you say that about Pastor Mark?
No.
Pastor-
I just mean he has a lot of really
You
good
heard it
things
first
to
here
say.
on
He has good
Verified
stories.
Podcast.
He has
Brett's
really
opinion.
good stories. He
And
has
a
a
lot
lot
of
of
wisdom.
wisdom. He has really
true.
good things to say. So I'm not going to say as much. Anyway, can we just move on from that point? I
All
love
right.
you, Pastor Mark.
And media team, you can cut that out. All right. We're
I
here.
will.
Brett's like, I'll cut it out later. We're talking about confrontation today. And not just like confrontation, but dealing with confrontation. Now, chances are, dealing with confrontation is your favorite thing to do. Most likely not, to be honest.
Yeah.
And it's been a growing, I think, kind of experience for us preparing for this. Learning a lot of different perspectives, because that's really what confrontation is about, is what do you do when your perspective doesn't line up with someone else's perspective, or when your expectation doesn't line up with their expectation, and then things kind of get gritty. And then what do you do when there's disagreement, sometimes heavy disagreement?
Yeah.
How do you handle that as a believer? And so that's what we're talking about today.
Yep.
It's a good topic.
It is a
It
good
is
topic.
a good topic.
I'm excited because I have a lot of people I want to confront, but I figure like this is the right place to do it.
Yeah.
So I'll just send them the podcast
During
and just be like, all right, this is what I have against you, and this is what I have against you.
I think you should just randomly call them out on the podcast. Just as
what
we
I'm
talk
saying.
about things like, you know, people hear and be like, so-and-so, and you just say their name right there. Be like, Jimmy.
Yeah, I have a whole list of names.
People's names, perfect.
You send it to people and be like, start listening at this minute marker.
So my question is, was the first person you wanted to confront Pastor Mark about how much he's talking on the podcast?
No.
Okay, I mean, he was the first person you name dropped.
That's true. No, that was an accident. I didn't write him down here. No.
He was not on the list.
I'm gonna cut that in anyway, so no one knows what you're talking
no,
about.
no.
Right.
We're leaving it in. We're leaving it in. It's juicy. Heather, you had a really great kind of definition for confrontation you were sharing with us earlier. Why don't you share that again?
I don't remember the definition that I shared earlier, but what I do remember is the approach to confrontation, which is that it should be an ongoing conversation, right? I think I read it out of my book. Let me look it up.
Hold on a second. Heather, if you
Hold
could
on,
give us a
just
definition.
pause.
Hold on, I got it right here. I'm really excited about this definition I shared with you earlier. The point of confrontation is to restore relationship.
Yes.
That
but
was
that's
the definition.
point of it. That's not what it is.
That's true. That's
The
not
point
a
of it is-
definition. It's the point.
it's-
yeah.
To move us
Don't
towards
confront me right
redemptive
now.
relationship.
You're on the list.
I'm surprised I'm not the only one on
You
the
can put a
list.
mark there because Cody's now been somewhat
I just
dealt
wrote
with.
your
Somewhat
name down like 12
12
times.
times. Cody.
Okay, so confrontation is meant to be more of a lifestyle than an unusual event. So it should be set within the context of relationship,
Yeah.
which is different, I think, than how we normally think of confrontation, because I think of it as a really hard event that I would like to avoid. I don't think of it as an ongoing conversation for my own growth and understanding of another person.
Yeah. Well, and it feels like it's almost impossible on this side of eternity to be in relationship without dealing with confrontation with
Right.
people. Would you guys agree with that?
Yes.
I remember I read it in David Guzik's commentary, but it's an old poem. He didn't write it. I don't remember who did. But it says, to live above with those we love, undiluted glory. To live below with those we know, quite another story. And in the end, living together in heaven, it's going to be undiluted glory.
Right.
Yeah.
But right now, in our
Right.
humanness and our brokenness with our emotions and our fatigue and our tiredness and our dysfunction, we just did a podcast on that. If you didn't listen to that, go back and catch it. Super helpful. It's quite frequent at sometimes that we find ourselves having to deal with confrontation.
Right.
It is.
It's true.
So is that book saying like every morning we need to wake up with the idea of like I have to have someone today that I need
Like
to
a
confront?
bounty hunter for confrontation.
It's kind of like a routine.
Like Boba
you gotta
Fett
put
for
it into-
confrontation.
Yes.
I think it's the mindset of how do I live in alignment with God's will, and how do I live in peace and harmony with my brothers and sisters, and how do I help them to live in alignment with God's will?
Yeah.
I love that.
Because confrontation really isn't about someone upset me or stepped on my toes. It's about right relationship with God,
Right.
right?
Well, and it's about right relationship with God, but it's also about restoring right relationship with one another.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because usually when we talk
Yes.
about a confrontational issue,
That's true.
you're out of right relationship with another brother, a sister,
Yeah.
a spouse, and it's glorifying to
Yeah.
God to deal with it,
Yeah.
to
Yep.
walk through it. And this is kind of a tricky one
Yeah.
because we were talking about nobody likes confrontation. Like no one looks forward to confrontation. We were even talking, earlier about should we have the perspective, kind of like Brett and I were just joking, that you should
Yeah.
seek out confrontation because in some ways you should, but not in the way where it's like you want to get in fights with everyone,
Right.
but
Right.
in ways where you just want to be aware of it. You don't want to
Yeah.
let it go. And I love what you were saying earlier, Heather, as we were preparing for this podcast, that the opposite of love is indifference.
Right.
Love cares enough to confront.
Yes.
Indifference, though, I guess would be not loving enough or not caring enough. And that's where it gets sticky for you and I, because sometimes I feel like I love this person and I don't want there to be more conflict or more of a fight. So because
Right.
I care for them, I won't actually confront them.
Yeah.
But
Right.
from their perspective, it's like Cody doesn't care enough to address this situation. And then they're hurt and then I'm hurt. And so talk to me about it, guys.
Well, I was going to say that even before that, there's a couple ways that confrontation is wrong, especially in our culture and what's going
Right.
on. One of those is before people go to the source of where the confrontation should go, they go to everyone else, right? So
yeah.
it's the gossip
Yep.
of she said, he said, all of that kind of stuff, which creates just such a mess, especially if you want to restore that good relationship you have with that person. That's going to make it way worse.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I've seen that in
Yes.
ministry where even if I'm trying to get wisdom from people, so I'm not necessarily like knowingly gossiping, but just like, hey, what do
Right.
you think I should do in this situation? If they find out about it, sometimes it can
Yeah.
really make a mess.
Can be hurtful.
And then obviously the other way is just coming about it through like an aggressive standpoint of like, you
Yeah.
hurt me, you did this to me.
Yeah.
How dare you?
Emotional response.
Yeah, emotionally.
Yeah.
So for me personally, I feel like the best way to confront is or number one or whatever bullet point. I always try to make sure that I cool off.
Yeah.
That's wisdom.
Because I
Yep.
think like it's so easy for me if someone does something or says something they didn't even mean, I always have to step back and think like, did that make me angry enough to say things that I know is out of my flesh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the other part of it is just being really prayerful.
Yeah.
And thinking through like, where are they at personally? Like, are they in a good spot with the Lord? I even wrote that down where it's consider the nature of who you're confronting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like consider where they're at personally, because if they're in a bad place or if they're, if lots of things are going wrong in their life, they might be like more short tempered. They might say things they
Right.
don't mean to say. Their actions might speak differently than normal. And so
True.
sometimes that's where we just have to come alongside of them rather than confronting them.
Yeah.
So-
Right.
And Brett, I just want to give you full props. You are so good at confronting people. So good. I've had opportunity to do it with you where we've gone together to confront people where there's been sin or issues, or I've been confronted by you, or I've witnessed you confront others. And you do such a good job of that, of keeping it unemotional, other than love, right? We want people to pick up on an emotion, but it shouldn't be our temper. Shouldn't be our frustration. Shouldn't be our anger. It should be our love. You do a good job of showing that emotion to people when you confront them. And you also do a really good job of understanding where they've come from. And I think the reason maybe you're able to do that is because you practice what you preach, and that I take a moment to calm down and think logically through it. I remember going through a program called Listening to Learn that was used originally for a company, and I can't say which one, because the guy who's a manager for this huge company, he did it for our church. He's a believer, and their company has rights on it, so he had to do like a custom thing for us from a more Christian perspective. But one thing they talked about is we have what's called an amygdala response, which is that I don't know how it all works, but it's the fight, flight, or freeze.
Right. Yeah.
When something happens, we get confronted, when we get stressed, difficult situation.
Yeah.
And they talked about practicing using a logical question, because logic breaks an amygdala response. And so they said literally, like, they have it down, like, be ready to ask yourself a mathematical equation. And I've done it, and it works. When you all of a sudden get angry and you're flared up, be like, 12 times 37 equals. And it's amazing how it overwrites that and cuts you out, because logic breaks down the amygdala response. But it's so wise of you to say, hey, instead of just losing in the moment, or sometimes if you can be a calm-headed person, it's probably best to deal with it in the moment. But if you can't be, it's best to wait then until you've calmed down, until you get some perspective before you confront.
Yeah.
Or else you can just make it worse.
Yeah.
And I have a rule too, and I've mentioned this in staff meetings, so you guys have already heard it, but my rule for confrontation is if I can give grace to them without bitterness, then I don't need to go to them.
Right.
If that makes sense.
If you can overlook.
Right. Overlook. Again, it comes back to like knowing where they have been.
Yeah.
You know, if it's really a sin that's an issue in their life, that's a different story, because what it is at Galatians 6 that talks about you who are spiritual, restore your brother.
In a spirit of, is it humility or gentleness?
Gentleness. I think it's
Gentleness.
which is huge, you know?
Yeah,
so
not smacking them down.
That's a different story, but like even with marriage, you know, if me and Jill get into a little fight, or if she hurts me, then I have to think through, like, is this worth bringing up, or can I just forget it and not look back and say, remember what you did back here? I know we never talked about it, but you did this to me. But it's just like I'm able to forgive and forget and move on.
Yeah.
But if I can't, and there's bitterness that stays, you know, within my heart, then I need to confront them about it.
Yeah.
I feel like sometimes we bury the hatchet, but we remember where we buried it in case we need to dig it up.
So it's not really buried.
It's not really buried.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Heather, you got a lot of thoughts on this. What are you thinking?
Well, one thought that I'm thinking, I have a quote that a friend of mine recently told me. Her pastor told her this. It says, if you're eager to say it, maybe you shouldn't. And if you're reluctant to say it, maybe you should. And maybe that depends on personality and temperament. But this is probably for something that's not so much in the moment, but more you see something in someone's life and you're thinking, maybe this needs to be addressed. But I think that is a good way to filter self, right? To think, do I just want to cut this person down, or do I want to build them up and I know it might hurt them and I don't want to inflict pain on them? I just thought there was some wisdom in that.
Well, I do love it because that's a motive checker.
Yes.
Like if you're eager to say it, why are you eager to say it?
Right.
Oftentimes when we're eager to say it, it's because we're eager to get back.
Yeah.
And that doesn't handle confrontation.
Right. It's true. It's true. What were the things you had at the beginning? Because you were sharing some things about like a business approach to confrontation. And I thought there were some good things in there.
Yeah, I was reading some articles on dealing with confrontation in a professional setting, a business setting. And I like it because it's a different perspective. But obviously, we're a church and we're talking about interpersonal relationship. But I got a lot of really good things from it.
Yeah.
A couple things that I wrote down that I picked up from it is, one, learning to manage yourself. And that's really what Brett was talking about. Self-management, self-awareness is so big when dealing with confrontation. And you got to know yourself. Maybe you're a kind of person you can be level-headed in the moment, be calm, be cool, seize the teaching moment, you know, and address the situation right there.
Yeah.
Maybe it's best to wait, maybe for their sake, maybe for your own sake. That's the second piece to confrontation. That's self-management, but also being able to read where they're at in the moment. And I think it was success.com that was talking about it, where if you can't learn to manage your own emotion, then you're going to get worked up and stressed out and angry and everything else. And when that happens, you actually lose your ability to read someone else's body language and see where they're at.
Yep.
Because sometimes some people may snap on us and we instantly get flared up. But if we just calm down, take a look at them, we could be like, they look sleep deprived. They look like they have 1,000 things to do on their plate today.
Yeah.
They look like, and then all those things you can filter through, and it can help you come to an understanding of, okay, this is why they acted this way. And it may not be all right, but then it brings me to the place of, can I overlook it? And if it's something that can't be overlooked, when would be the right time to address it? Yeah. Right now, when they're up to their ears in paperwork, it's not the time to say, hey, that's not the right way to respond. You know, maybe later over a coffee break or something. Yeah. But I think that helps us even in our own personal relationships. There's times when Laura or I have our hands full. We have an infant son, 6 months old, and he's the joy of our life, but he's becoming mobile, and it's so easy to get stressed out, and you have all these things going. Yeah. And if you snapped at the other person, maybe you didn't mean to. Maybe it has nothing to do with them. Maybe it has everything to do with the day that you've had and the things you're dealing with. And I think learning to, manage myself, not be angry, see where they're at, gain the perspective you were talking about, Brett, of what's going through their life right now. You know, or is it a past thing? So often people get triggered by stuff that's happened in the past. And if you can gain that perspective, I think you can really have the advantage when dealing with confrontation. Another one is not being afraid of confrontation. Right. Yeah. You know, they said it, you're like, no duh. But to be honest, I think we all kind of fear confrontation. Yeah. It's not natural. Right. Yeah. But
I think it depends on who you are as a person. You know, some people they like the confrontation and the
very few, but there are some who thrive on it.
Yeah, but mostly you're right. Like a lot of people are like, no, I don't want to confront. It's awkward. Right. You know, it feels weird.
Yeah.
To do that.
Feels uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Well, and like the words, and we all get so, if you've ever been in a confrontational moment, you think about, you sit down and then you start talking and you just feel like your words are like bricks falling out of your mouth. I mean, it feels like the most awkward, weird, like you feel like you meant to say this and what you did was say that. And now, and so it's hard for us, but learning to not be afraid of confrontation, instead seeing it as a chance to learn, to grow as an individual. Yep. That's interesting. You confronting others is actually good for your own growth as a human. Seeing things from a different perspective, that's what Brett was sharing. And it can actually bring about really innovative and creative solutions to problems. Yeah. I think about it with your own spouse. How many times have you had confrontation, and as you worked through it, a creative solution came out that you hadn't thought of? True. Where it's like, well, if you really need the car at this time, my wife and I, for instance, only had one car for a bit. If you can have the car at this time, and then I can have the car at this time, and then we can, you know, and you find a creative way to work around it and shift your schedules because you worked through it.
Right. And sometimes you uncover a deeper need or a deeper issue. Yeah. Right? Sometimes someone's acting in a certain way, and that action causes you to, it's like red flags. You're like, okay, we need to deal with this. But when you talk with them, you find out, okay, they're actually carrying all this emotional weight, or something else is going on in their life that I didn't even realize. Yeah. And so it becomes not so much about, you know, correcting this particular behavior, but coming alongside them as they navigate something different. Yeah. And then the presenting behavior is resolved. Yeah.
Well, I like, that. As a parent, that's confrontation right there. Yeah. Coming alongside them to help them navigate, point them in the right direction.
Yep. And I think we have to ask what the heart of God is. In Matthew 18:15, where it talks about if your brother sins against you, and this is the one of go to him and bring another person to him. It's sandwiched between the parable of the lost sheep and the parable of the unforgiving servant, and both of those have the theme of restoration. Yeah. So you've got a parable, and then right in the middle, you've got some really direct instruction that's not a parable. But the heart of that passage in Scripture is restored relationship. Yeah. And so I think that's what, when we go to someone, we would like to have a restored relationship with them, but ultimately it's about their restored relationship with God. Right. So if we confront someone who's in sin and they're sinning against God ultimately, and they don't want to change that, then it will affect our relationship. Yeah. But it is ultimately a fracture in their relationship with God. And so how do we love someone well, and how do we help ourselves to not get caught up in feeling offended or feeling hurt in the midst of it. Because we bring our own stuff with us.
It's true.
Well, and I feel like it's easier if sin is at play, because then it's like,
true.
okay, we have a biblical mandate.
In some
we
ways,
know what
yep.
the truth is. It's hard, but I almost
Yep.
find that easier. It's difficult when it's just a matter of perspective and sin is not
Yes.
involved.
Right, I
Let me
agree.
give you
I
a big
agree,
one.
yep.
Should we wear masks? Should we not?
Right.
Ooh.
Oh my gosh, social media,
Lots of confronting
churches,
with that one.
businesses,
Right.
people dividing and fighting
Right.
Yep.
like children over it. Now, it's not a matter
Yeah.
of sin.
Right.
So how do we go about confronting one another and dealing with that in a loving way to restore unity in relationship?
Right.
So I think you have to, obviously prayer is the biggest thing. Before you confront, before you talk about it to other people, you have to pray and just be like, Lord, is this you? Is this your heart? You know, the
Yeah.
reason that I'm
Yeah.
doing this. But then the second thing is, because you've prayed and you've had peace from God, you have to be okay with the outcome, right? So,
Yeah.
Yes.
so if you're
Yeah.
confronting someone else and you're saying, look, this is my perspective, and I don't mean that you need to hold my perspective, because we
Right.
should never shove our perspectives onto other people, especially
No.
when it's not sin and it's just like, oh, you hurt my feelings, or
Right.
you're doing something a little bit different or whatever. It should never be about us just like shoving our opinions on other people.
Right.
But we need to be okay if they disagree or have a different outtake on
Yes.
what actually happens. We need to be like, okay, well, that was your perspective. I'm glad we could talk about it. Can we move on from here?
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
Right. Well, and the mask thing is really relevant and really volatile. I mean,
It
a
is.
lot of people find it very offensive.
I'm almost afraid to bring it up on this podcast. If we've offended you by bringing it up on this podcast, hang with us. We're talking about confrontation.
Right. People find it very offensive on either side.
Yeah.
And that's a tricky one.
Well, and I think it's a good example because it's not a matter of sin.
Right.
To wear a mask is not sin. To not wear a mask is not sin.
Right.
But there are very different perspectives on it.
Yeah.
Right.
And how do we still come together, work through our differences, and have unity? And I think that's why I love what you read at the
Yeah.
beginning, the definition that I was fishing for. That's not a definition. I was wrong. But that idea
Yeah.
of it's about restoring right relationship
Yes.
with others and with God.
Yeah.
Because that's what we need as the church. We get so divided in our
Yeah.
families, with our friends, in our church body. We get so divided. And then it's like, the issue is sometimes we actually don't try to make it better.
Right.
Sometimes we're like, well, better
Right.
off without you, which is so sad because we're going to spend an
Yes.
eternity with each other.
Yeah.
Yes.
And are you
for
going to have to
sure.
wait till heaven where Jesus is like, all right,
Yes.
can we make this, and obviously he's going to wipe every tear from our eye and sin. It's going to be different. But wouldn't God's heart be right now that we work through it?
Yeah.
But you know
Yeah.
what? Everyone struggles with it.
Yeah.
Barnabas and Paul split up over
Yep.
it.
Yeah. Well, I was even thinking, actually, we're teaching through Galatians for college group. Chris did.
Oh, that's a great one.
Chris is here doing our cameras today, but he did a really great teaching for the college ministry on the confrontation that Paul
Yeah.
had to Barnabas over,
Or to Peter.
to Peter.
Oh, that's such a good
Because,
passage,
yeah,
Galatians.
Yeah.
It is a really good passage too. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, like, we know that Peter, he was hanging out with the Gentiles and knowing that God has called them to be grafted in, we're
Yeah.
grafted into the vine. And so he's eating with them, having a great time. And then he sees that Jews are coming. And so he completely changes, how he looks, because he needs to hang out with the Jews and be, very Christianese, or, that legalism kind of a thing. And I feel like we do that a lot. I feel like that hypocrisy can come out a little bit too much if we're not careful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but just what you were saying reminded me of that part, that it does divide the church, and
Yeah.
and we just have to, be open with each other and careful with each other, have
Yeah.
grace,
Yeah. Well, I almost feel like it's more hurtful when we don't address it. And that's another point that I have on here. Avoiding confrontation only makes it worse.
Yeah.
Yep.
Now, there's
Yeah.
definitely moments where there needs to be space. I
Yeah.
mean, like, you can ride a horse till it's dead. Sometimes you just gotta, and then you just kick the horse while it's down. Yeah, I mean, ever heard someone say, "Don't beat a dead horse, and don't kick a dead horse"?
Yeah.
Well, it comes from confrontational issues more than likely,
Yes.
And
Yes.
at some point you need to know when to call it and say we need to take a break.
Yep.
We need to let there be some space. It's amazing what space can do.
Yeah.
Look at Paul and Barnabas, missionary
Yeah.
powerhouse duo, and yet split up over confrontation. But then years later, reconciliation and restoration
Right.
between
Yeah,
Paul
true.
and Mark. God brought it about. So I think sometimes we feel like in our timing, we have to resolve it now.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's a big issue. When there's confrontation and conflict in confrontation, there are heart issues going on.
Yeah.
And the only thing you
Yeah.
can control is your own heart.
Yeah.
Right.
You can't control theirs. So I think there is a spot where you say, hey, there needs to be space.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, I think it can be negative to avoid confrontation unless it's clear that space needs to be given. Do you guys agree with that? Do you disagree with it?
Yeah. I do agree
Both
with that.
and?
I do. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you have more
Yeah.
to add to that?
No, I agree.
Yeah.
Good job, Cody.
Thank you.
One other thing I think
Wait, I had a good point?
you had a good point.
Yes.
One other thing I think of is that sometimes personalities just rub us the wrong way. I mean, there's
Yeah.
just people who aren't going to like me, right? And there's people who I'm going to
That's true.
think I'm just not sure what makes them tick. And those are different kinds
But
of
I
things.
know what makes them ticked off.
Right, right. And so I think those are, I don't know, those are things where Scripture talks to us about bearing with one another. And I think those are the issues where we have to bear with one another, right?
Yeah.
It's not necessarily something to confront. It's recognizing, because I have things in my life that at times I think, why am I like this? Why do I do this thing? Why do I constantly find myself tripping up in this area?
Yeah.
And to just remember that God is patient with me.
Yeah.
He loves me. And I am who I am. I may always struggle in my particular struggle areas, and other people are the same way. And I want grace and tenderness in those areas.
Yeah, for sure.
Right?
Yeah.
And so how can I extend that to other people? And it
Yeah.
can be
Yeah.
hard.
Well, I love this verse. You made me think of it while you were talking
Yeah.
from Luke 17. And it's Jesus speaking. He said, take heed to yourselves. If your brother sins against you, rebuke him. And if he repents, forgive him.
Yeah.
And then Jesus says, and if he sins against you 7 times in a day, and 7 times in a day returns to you saying, I repent,
Yeah.
you shall forgive him.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Those are beautiful words and really hard to live out.
Very
It
hard
is.
to live
Right?
out.
Yeah.
Very hard.
It's hard for me to speak that to myself, and it's hard for me when there's someone that I'm around that continually does the same thing, and you think,
For
my
sure.
word, get it together. And yet I look at myself and think, I don't get it together.
Yeah.
Like,
You know who's actually really good at this is my wife. Laura is incredibly grace-filled, and I've been
Yeah.
amazed by how
yeah,
she has the heart of Jesus, is capable of, if you came back to her 7 times in one day, just to say, I forgive you if
Yeah.
you're repentant. And it's something I'm trying to grow in, because I feel like I'm probably more geared towards, 7 times a day I'll rebuke them.
right.
And
yeah,
but I love how Jesus said, you rebuke them. If they're sinning, there's a rebuke. But if
Yeah.
they repent, there's forgiveness.
yeah,
And then I think that's the piece of letting it go. You said it's not
Yeah.
truly bearing the hatchet if you remember where you put it.
right.
I think that's so true.
Yeah,
Not digging up things from the past. That's one of my last
Yeah.
points on confrontation that I have is
yeah,
focus on the present unless the past plays a part.
right.
Sometimes people have
a
habitual
good point.
routines they're
Yep.
stuck in. You need to say, hey, so-and-so, can you not
Yep.
see over the last 5 years your life cycle?
Yeah.
And now that's different. But
Right.
it's easy to let past things build up and then a present dilemma come and say, okay, now I'm
Yeah.
just going to rain it all on them. Don't do that. And
Yeah.
it's easy to, when you start addressing one thing, be like, oh, by the way, while we're here and while I have confidence and while I'm confronting you, I want to talk about these 7 other, and just start
Yes.
pulling other problems in.
Yeah,
Yes.
for sure.
And that's wrong too. I think if
Yes.
you're going to confront someone, sticking on topic, staying on
Yes.
focus. In fact, one guy, I'm just going to quote it. It's from success.com by Mark Samuel. I don't fully agree with this quote, but this is one thing he said. Be prepared and understand that adversity is something you're going to have to face every day.
Yeah.
If you believe that, oh, no, this is the wrong one. Whoops.
That one's probably good too, though.
That's probably a good one. The one I meant to read was by Wei Shin La.
Okay.
MD, also from the same group. He said, before heading into a bad situation, make sure you understand it and you're fully prepared. Then figure out what you want to away with. What do you want to walk away with? What is your goal after the confrontation?
Yes.
I thought that is so good. Like, think
Yes.
about, okay, we're going to walk into this, but I'm not going to address these other things. This is the one thing we're going to address.
Yeah.
And what's the outliner that we're looking for? What are we
Yeah.
looking to walk away with? Restoration is what the
Right.
Christian perspective is.
Right.
Should be our goal.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
That's a really good perspective to have, you know?
Yeah.
What do I want the outcome to be from
Right.
this confrontation?
Yep.
Because we don't think about that
No.
very often. You know, a lot of times we're just like, I want to try to say my piece of
Yes.
what I'm feeling.
Yes.
And really, if we're being honest, we just want the other person to apologize.
Right. We want them to do the thing that
Yeah.
makes me feel comfortable.
Exactly.
Well,
Right?
Yeah.
And here's, on the business perspective, they say, what do I want to walk away with?
Yeah.
For Christians, I really think the questions we should be asking is, what does God want us to walk away with?
Yeah.
Yes. And what is the work that God wants to do in my life and in the life of the other person?
Yeah.
Right?
Because on a business level, you might be like, I want this to be resolved so we can get back to productivity.
Yes.
But that's very
Yeah.
business. When we're talking about family, we're talking about
Yeah.
real life things where I may come and confront and say, I want things to be restored, but their heart may not be ready for it.
That's true.
Right.
They may hear it and they may be
Right.
upset, arrogant, something may be going on, block it. They may be
Yeah.
unwilling to restore at that time.
Right.
So that's why I have to ask, what does God want me to walk away with?
Yep.
Yeah.
Because if that just means I need to own my part in this,
Yep.
confront, own my piece, address, and then leave it with them and leave it with God, then that's the part I have to play.
Yeah.
And be okay with it.
I remember being confronted one time and being really angry about it.
Yeah.
And granted, I don't think it happened rightly. I don't think the way that it was
Yeah.
approached was maybe the way I would have done it.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, it was confrontation. But I was just really, really angry about it. And really, it kind of broke our friendship up for a little while. And until the Lord started speaking to me and saying those things that person said were actually true, you know?
Yeah.
And so I think it's also really good to know that as God is working in other people's hearts, it could take time, you know?
Yes.
And so when you come out of, like, when we're talking about the outcome, Lord, what is the outcome? We have to be okay with saying, Lord, if it's not today that there's
Yes.
restoration,
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm going to trust you nonetheless, you know?
Yeah.
It's not like a certain way of confronting is a one size fits all kind
Right.
of a thing. It's not like it's always going to work no matter who
Yep.
you're confronting, because that's just not the case, you know?
But I
Yeah.
think for you and me, we're not to lose the hope of
Oh,
restoration.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we've all been
Yeah.
there. I love what you said, Brett. Confrontation, conflict, serious conflict can take years
Yeah.
Yeah.
for both parties to work through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Years.
And I think that's where relationship is key.
Yeah.
Because are we going to stick around relationally, right? Maybe we end up in different places, but relationally, are we going to stick around? When you're talking
Yeah.
about the goal, I was thinking in my mind about building bridges towards other people. So maybe what we're doing is putting another plank in the bridge.
Yeah.
But we maybe can't build the whole bridge, but we can put another plank in the bridge. We can take those steps forward towards the other person and hopefully make it safe so that when they're ready to start putting planks on the other side of the bridge, we're right there ready to meet
I
them.
love it. You got to take the plank out of your own eye and use it to build a bridge.
Use it to build a bridge.
Boom.
Very
That's
well.
great. Is that what the scripture says?
That was good.
No, but I love it. I think it's good. It's
good.
because we
Oh, that's
talked
a good
about in
analogy.
that
Yeah,
one
it's kind of a way
podcast
to
with,
imagine it.
with Roy Hession. He said the plank oftentimes is the way we react towards other people wronging us.
Yeah. It's
true.
That's confrontation. Well, take the plank out, make a bridge with it. Use it
Yeah.
as an opportunity to restore fellowship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes confrontation, I was looking at this quote and it kind of goes with what we were talking about. Proper biblical confrontation is never motivated by impatience, frustration, hurt, or anger. But if we're honest, sometimes we do have those feelings and those emotions, and we have to process through that. But proper biblical confrontation, that shouldn't be the motivation. It shouldn't be, I'm impatient, therefore.
Yeah.
Or I'm angry, I'm frustrated, therefore I'm going to come at you full force. It should be this, I'm committed to relationship to this other person
Yeah.
for as long as it takes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I love this. We put out a lot of good thoughts out there. I know we got a lot of scriptures too.
Yeah.
I was thinking let's stop now, take some of our
Yep.
thoughts, and let's start breaking it down
Yeah.
to steps
It's a good idea.
practically. And obviously, we're not the authorities on confrontation. We're still learning through this as well. So if you've seen things or learned things or heard things, or you've learned to handle confrontation a certain way, we would love it if you sent us a message, put it in our comments.
Absolutely.
Reach out to us with it, because we're just seeking to grow together in
Yeah.
this. But right away, I love what you said, stopping and self-addressing, that's self-aware, self-management. Why do I want to confront? What am I feeling in the midst of this?
Yeah.
Okay, and how do I bring myself to the place of confronting out of love?
Yep.
Yeah.
That's the first step, I
Yep.
would say, to confrontation.
Yeah.
Healthy confrontation for you and I.
Healthy, yeah.
Yeah. I think knowing the person that you're going to talk with can be helpful.
Yeah, I
Because-
love that you said that, Brett. Sorry for cutting you off, Heather.
Yeah, no, I think that can be helpful because if we know what's going to get to the heart of a person,
Yeah.
because sometimes in some situations I've been in, there are some people that I talk with that if I go and share my own story of having been confronted or an area where I'm struggling, like share my own sin, it helps to soften the blow and prepare the heart. It kind of tills the soil. And I've
Yeah.
had other people do that with me where they've come to me and I walked away and thought, oh my word, they just confronted me and I didn't even realize it was confrontation because it was so gentle and so kind that it didn't feel hurtful.
Yeah.
So sometimes if we till that soil by knowing the person and knowing what, and we see, was it Nathan that did that with David where he came and shared about the lamb and sort of tilled that soil and got David ready to hear the hard truth.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
In the business world, they call that kind of idea the what's in it for me factor of confrontation, where it's when you come to someone also remembering what are their goals, what are they trying to accomplish,
Yeah.
and reminding them of why working through confrontation is
Yes.
beneficial to them too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. And some people are really wired by that, right? For some
They are.
personality types, that's like the key that's going to unlock their heart and help them to receive what you have to say.
But more than that, sometimes confrontation, in us, there is a desire to be understood by
Yeah.
God and by others.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so often when we stop, like Brett said, and we just gain some perspective and we let the Lord, plus guys, we have the Holy Spirit. I love that, who reveals things to us and the
Yeah.
secrets and the troubles of other people's hearts. When we let the Lord lead us and get into perspective on where they're at
Yeah.
and come to them, and then people feel understood,
Yeah.
that softens the heart. Like you said, that's going to tell like none other.
Yeah.
For sure.
And if
Yeah.
if you don't know what's going on, here's the best thing you can do: sit down with them and ask them what's going on in their life.
Yeah.
Yes.
Not in a rude way, like, "Hey, so and so,
I
that's
agree.
pretty snarky of you. Want to explain what's going on?" But, "Hey, so and so, seems like you got a lot going on. What's what's up?"
Actually, that I don't know where I learned this from. I probably learned it from someone because I know I didn't make it up. But I just remember when I was first in ministry, I was 21, 22 years old. And I came to this realization that that's exactly how I need to approach confrontation. It's not about
Yeah.
coming to a person and just being like, this is how you hurt me. This is
Yeah.
what you're doing. You're in sin, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
But it's like, hey, this is how I am feeling right now, and I just want to get your perspective. Like, where are you
Yeah.
at? Like, is life going okay? Like,
Yeah.
are you okay with the Lord? And just kind of asking questions, because I think when you ask questions, then it's a lot easier for people to open up and be able
Yeah.
to share. And so there's no hostility. It's just like,
Yeah.
man, let's, if we do want to restore one another, we're
Yeah.
restoring one another in that way of just getting to the depth of what's going on.
Well, and it removes
Yeah.
assumptions.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because if you can sit down and
Yes.
ask them and hear what's really going on,
Yeah.
how many times have we sat down with someone and you've asked and something comes out you didn't even know about, like
True.
a family member
Yep.
just passed away, or I just lost my job,
Yep.
and we didn't even know. And here
Yep.
we were going to come down on them.
Yes.
When we didn't know that they're really going through it.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is why were we saying that in Galatians is where it talks about with gentleness.
Yeah.
And I think, that gentleness is a grace to the other person.
Yeah.
And it kind of guards us against foolishness, because I can think of
does.
some times in my life that I just cringe, where I just shared with someone and spent the whole time talking and completely missed the opportunity to truly address what was going on for them. Because
Yeah.
I had all of my words that I thought were so important and I had to get out, and I didn't listen.
Well, and
I talked more.
And when that happens, we miss the opportunity to minister to one another,
Yep.
which we as Christians are called to do.
Yep.
To serve one another.
Yeah.
It's so beautiful that I think Christian confrontation, you can come to confront, but if you're willing to listen, you're actually going to find the way to serve them the
Yes.
best.
It's true.
And
Yes.
build them up in their most holy faith. That's
Yeah.
Jude.
Yeah.
You know, building one another up.
Yeah. It's true.
So what step are we on?
So the first one is pause. Pause. And then
Okay.
immediately
Well,
follow
that
that.
could even like be what I was saying earlier with pausing or cooling off.
Well, I was
Yes.
going to say
Kind
it's
of the same
pause
thing.
Yes.
and get perspective.
Yeah.
Okay.
Pause
and
gets
get-
perspective
yeah.
of self, perspective of others.
Right.
You need to ask yourself what
Yeah.
your motivation is. You need to process that with God. If you're angry, take a second to cool off. You need to ask yourself what's going on in their life. If you don't know, you need to listen.
Yeah.
Choose to sit down and listen.
Yeah.
I think the third step would be addressing the issue.
Yeah.
If you've paused,
Yeah.
you've gotten perspective, and if there is an issue, then you got to address the issue.
Yep.
How do you do that?
Bring your taser. Make sure you have that.
Perfect.
So
Perfect.
this is going to hurt me more than it hurts you.
That's tricky, and I think it depends on the issue and it depends on the person.
No, taser works every time.
That gets through every time. Man, there's such a wide range, because sometimes it's parent to child and sometimes there's a consequence. Like, this is going on and there's a consequence and we need to get it in line.
Yeah. Either way, I think there's similarities.
Yeah.
Okay. So saying what's true,
Yes.
because that's a big one. To be honest, sometimes that's where we fall short in confrontation. We
Yep.
don't want to say what's true.
Yep.
We're so scared to hurt them. Maybe we calm down. We sit down with them. We get perspective, and we see what's clearly going on. But you're like, I don't want to say it, so we just kind of meander around the bush and hope that
Yeah.
they go, "Oh, are you saying that I struggle with this?" And you'd be like, "I didn't say it, you did, but that's true." You
Right.
know,
Yeah, yeah.
versus just saying it to them, saying, "So and so, I love you, but I think there's an issue here,"
Yeah.
and then just saying what's true.
That's true.
That's hard for us.
It's very hard.
But they say love without truth is hypocrisy.
Yeah.
The truth without love is brutality.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
loving truth of, I love you, here's the truth.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then followed by, I love you again.
So is
Yeah.
that in the way you confront? Is that because of sin? Would you say, or would that be just even if there's just like a misunderstanding or hurt feelings or
That's a good
something
point.
like that?
Because those are different issues.
Those are different
Yeah.
issues, but I think even when there's not sin, there's always a truth element.
Yep.
At the center of all real truth is Jesus Christ. So you can always bring it back.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
for instance, the mask one, if you could sit down with someone and talk with them through it and say, so-and-so, I hear you, I hear what's going on, and I love you, but the truth is we need to find a way to be unified.
Right.
That's the truth.
Right.
There's not sin to confront, but I'm putting the truth back before both of us, saying we
Right.
need to choose
Yeah.
what's true.
Right.
And we need to choose to act upon what's true.
Right.
And I think the truth element, I just see it as the next step in addressing
Yeah.
confrontation.
Yeah, that's good.
That's a good one. Yes. And what does unity look like in this particular situation?
Yeah.
Like for that example.
And there's
Right.
flexibility based upon what
Yeah.
your scenario is, but I think the truth being put out, even when there's not sin, because it's good for
Right.
me to remember what's true in that moment,
Right.
you know?
Yeah. That's good. This is a good topic. It's a hard topic. And I feel like there's a lot of good wisdom, but then implementing it. I like this practical part because when you think about it, it's really tricky.
Yeah. Well, and this is the worst part of the practical piece. The
Mm-hmm.
implementing it is, I feel like the fourth step. So you've paused,
Mm-hmm.
you've gotten perspective, you've said what's true,
Yep.
but here's the part that's not yours, the response.
Right.
Yeah. The forgiveness.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
have to be willing to respond in the way that you need to respond, but you cannot control the way that they respond.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's the hardest piece about confrontation is it feels like you can go to all this work, dig
Yeah.
through all this dirt to find gold and then not find gold
Yeah.
at the bottom. And now that's the
Absolutely.
part where we said sometimes conflict is long term.
Right. That's
And
what
there
I was
will be
thinking.
gold there.
Yeah.
But it's hard in the moment when if it's especially if it's something that is deep to us and important to us, if we've
Yeah.
thought through it and we've processed it with the Lord, that's a lot of time. Maybe you've spent an afternoon or a few days thinking on it.
Yeah.
You've come back, you've sat down with them, you've gained perspective, you've prayed for them, you've listened, and now you're sharing the truth and your heart is to restore, but maybe in that moment their heart is hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can't control that.
Yeah. or they just have a different conviction.
Yeah.
There may be some areas where, I mean, I've had this in relationships where you kind of lay out your things and they lay out their things, and you're just like, I just don't see it the way you see it. And they don't see it the way I see it. And so then how do we proceed relationally so that we have relational unity, even while we have a difference of viewpoint on issues that are maybe a disputable matter, right?
I want to hear your thoughts, Brett, but I would say choosing love. I had a friend who told me a long time ago, is mentoring me. He said, if you make choices out of love, you're not going to have regret in the end.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, it's when you're making choices that aren't out of love that you're going to look back and say, I should have done that differently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, just not going straight to judgment of others.
Yes.
Based upon where they're at. We've already talked about that. I just lost my train of thought because I did that. I always.
No, I think what you're saying, though, is not even going to judgment based on the response.
Yeah, on the response.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're saying, so the fourth point is even if their response takes a long time.
Or isn't the one you wanted. You have to be okay with that. And I've had really, really good friendships who have told me that they feel like I don't judge them based upon their differences of opinion, but I choose to love them nonetheless. And that's always really honored me because I love that. I love that. I don't always see that, but I'm just thankful that God has instilled that in me to care about people nonetheless of their faults or differences of opinion, like you said, Heather. And I think that's so important for everyone to realize, you know, that we are all morphed and changed and different, and you know, we have different personalities, and some of us are introverts and extroverts, and we just have all of these gears, I guess, you know, going, and we have to be okay that people are just different with us, and they're going to react differently. Some will get upset, and some will get quiet, and some will need like weeks to go away, and then they come back and they're like happier than ever. You know, it's just like we don't know how they're going to react, but we have to be okay with the outcome of it. And that's just one thing that we always have to hold on to, that take it to the Lord, pray about it, and say, Lord, you are in control of the outcome of what happens here. But the question is that if you do this confrontation and they take a lot of time, when is the next step to take with that person of like, hey, I want to see if we can hash this situation, follow up, and talk about it. One piece I think that needs to go in there before that step is like that quote where it said, what do you want to get out of this? I think it should be, you should also ask, what do you want to accomplish out of this? And that should be regardless of their decision. Like, I want to own what I've done wrong. Yeah. I want to put down my hatchet. You know what I mean? Bury my hatchet. I think you have to go into it willing, regardless of their response, to live differently and say, okay, I've done my part to address it right now. I'm going to love them. I'm going to continue to work with them on the long term. But especially if there's bitterness or frustration and they're not sorry, I still have to let it go and put it down. And this is what I'm thinking about. We know the redemptive love of God, that God has made peace between man and himself. Yep. And in some ways, I think of God who you can't say God buried the hatchet, but you can say God poured out his wrath at the cross. You could say God, I guess you could say God buried his wrath at the foot of the cross, you know, in the soil stained in the blood of Jesus. That's where his wrath for you and me lies. And how often do you and I have an error between us and God? And God is so long suffering and forgiving towards us to bring us to a new perspective. And I think we need to go into confrontation with that heart, regardless of what their response is going to be. Say, can I bury this, you know, my hatchet at the foot of the cross? Can I put it in the blood-soaked soil and leave it there? And then let the grace of God continue to work in my heart and their heart to resolve it long term. But I don't want to be in error before God, because I think that's the issue. If I go into it and it's not the response I wanted, I feel tempted, my own personality, to hold on to my axe and be like, well, I may need this in case you swing at me later, you know? And that's wrong. I need to say, you know what? I'm willing to lay down my arms at the foot of the cross, whether or not you are. And I'm going to love you until you get there, and love you when you get there, you know?
And love you, unconditionally. I'm going to love you whether you make the steps I would like to have you make. And I think one of the ways that we can live that out is praying for the other party and asking God to give us his heart towards them so that we're compassionate. Because I know there have been times where I've walked through something that's felt difficult, didn't get the response I was hoping for. And then I found that my own heart was inclined towards bitterness and frustration.
Yeah.
And so I felt like I let go of maybe issue A and issue B flared up, right?
Yeah.
And that's where my pride can come up. That's where this sense of feeling entitled to judge the other person rather than continuing to search my own heart, continuing to ask God to give me love for that heart, for that person in my heart.
Yeah.
Continually just confessing before the Lord that I'm struggling with this. I don't like how that person responded, and it's leaving me vulnerable to just carrying this, just not looking at them in a gracious way.
Yeah.
It's kind of that long simmering.
Well, I've experienced in my own life where, there's a grievance, there's confrontation, there's restoration, but there's still pain.
Yes.
And
that's another
isn't
really
that a
good.
hard one?
Yes.
And I've before been there where I felt the pain of it, even though maybe we've done some of the other steps. There's still pain, and then that pain festers.
Yes.
And and that's where there needs to be confession on my part, because I'm so quick to say, like, Lord, forgive me, I forgive them, all these other things. And then I remember sitting in the car with Laura one time and just saying, like, I've developed hatred towards this person. I didn't realize it until I said it, but when I confessed it, it went away. There was a brokenness, like, in my own heart, but I didn't realize that pain, unaddressed, sitting in my heart, produced hatred, which is a horrible thing. That's the seed of murder, the Bible says.
I think that's a really
I didn't kill
good
anyone,
point.
just to clarify on the podcast.
I'm glad that you clarified that. I think that's a really good point that you brought up, though, because it can be easy to feel like we've confronted, like you said, we walk through the steps, it's done.
Yeah.
But our hearts are not always settled with it. And all those emotions can flare up. It's like when you think you've put out a campfire and then it sort of flares back up.
Yeah.
Pain can do that. Pain can really fan the flames of a fire that we don't want to have burning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, I feel like that's a whole nother podcast,
It
because I
does
know
feel
we've
like
been on
that's
this one
another
for
topic.
a bit. But
Yeah.
dealing with pain in the mix of conflict, if I had to give one piece of wisdom right now, and it's from a very limited perspective, so don't quote me on it, I would just say you need to have someone you can be vulnerable with. Even if you can't be vulnerable with that person because of the way confrontation could be awkward. Sometimes coming to them saying, hey, I have so much pain because of what you did. That's not going to help, but having someone you can turn to. And obviously to the Lord first. And then a brother or sister in Christ, I would say, who can help you and say, I need prayer. Can you process with me? I feel this pain. I feel toxic. I feel whatever. And even being free to speak with the Lord about that. David poured his heart out and his pain out before God. Because if you keep it in, it's going to come back. I love that analogy. It's going to be the campfire that you thought you put it out. And then there can be a fire, believe it or not, even bigger in the end. If you've just let it fester on the inside.
It's like a weight. It's just such a weight on you that comes out in so many different ways. Like you said, that you notice like a hatred within you, but that can stir into tons of stress and anxiety and like all of these physical things that you don't even realize, all because you didn't like forgive someone fully or whatever, and I've noticed that in my life. I even have dreams sometimes where I have dreams about these things, and of confronting and talking with people and stuff like that. And it can be scary. It's scary. I have a taser in the dreams. So.
That's good. So you're safe.
So I'm okay in the dreams.
Guys, I think we should do another podcast on confession.
I think so too.
Because confession's both ways. Confessing when you've been wronged. And letting out the pain, but also confessing when you have wronged and you're holding it up. Oh, confession is so good. I love what you said, Brett. Confession brings freedom.
It really does. But it can be a long process too. I'll save that for the podcast.
Yeah, it really can.
Right? It's not just a one and done. It can be a long-term.
So let's go to final point then.
Okay.
So we've talked about pausing, gaining perspective. Speaking what's true, addressing the issue, and last one was something with a response. That's the problem when you make up the 4 points right here on the podcast. Go back. I'm sure it was
the one
great.
is be okay with the outcome.
Oh, be okay with the outcome. There it is. So the fifth
Yeah.
point, I think, is the one Brett talked about a little bit, and we kind of got off track. But that's the how do we move forward from here?
Yeah.
Now, if the confrontation, everything's gone well, then I really think there's that piece where you just close the book.
Yeah.
And like the Lord as far as the east is from the west, and you move forward with a clean slate.
Yeah.
Because it's the idea of being restored.
Yeah.
I love that. It's like if an item fell off a shelf, someone told me, he said, when you restore, it's like you pick it up and you put it right back where it was.
Yeah.
So if you and a friend have had a falling out, if at all possible, picking it up and restoring it. Now, I know there's different levels, and if there's sin involved, sometimes there has to be boundaries and things cannot be as they were. But if you can, restoring it to that position.
Yeah.
Now, that's the ideal. But what happens when it's not ideal?
Yeah.
That's what you said earlier, Brett. How do you move forward from there?
I'm glad you mentioned that. Did you have thoughts on how to move forward from there?
I asked the questions.
Oh, you asked the question.
Heather, you brought the 1, 2, 3, 4
I know,
books
I've got
on
several books.
confrontation with
This
you
one doesn't
today.
count because this is just a reminder.
Oh,
of
give us a
our-
plug real quick.
Okay. Through Gates of Splendor, that's our
That's our
podcast
book.
next week, but then it will come out the last week of February, right?
Last week of February.
So if you're reading this with us, read through it or get onto Hoopla, and they have audiobook for free, so you can listen to it for free.
And it's only 6.5 hours, and it is amazing.
It's
I'm doing the
really
audio
good.
version. It's so
Can
good.
I see it?
Yeah, it's really good. Yeah.
Elizabeth Elliott talking about missions when missions was still a pioneering style of work. And it is, guys, it is
It's so
inspiring.
good.
If you're like, well, I'm not really into missions, you should
Cool.
read it because their heart for God is inspiring no matter who you are. If you're a Christian, you're going to feel blessed.
Yeah, it's
Totally
absolutely
inspired.
true.
I mean, these guys were brilliant. They could have made a living doing anything else.
Yes.
And they chose to live this way for God. So good.
It's true. Okay, so I want to go back to what you were saying and add a little bit more to that. If you're in a situation of confrontation where there's abuse or some sort of extra circumstances, this is where it's advice to get help. Get a counselor, get a therapist, get the help that you need to walk through it, because there are real personality disorders that the regular path of confrontation isn't going to work.
The problem could be beyond you.
The problem could be beyond you, and to seek out other people who can help you walk that out while you're safe and protected for the good of the other person, but at the same time protecting, you know what I'm saying, an abusive situation, getting to the core of it. And I think that's...
Flip it. If you're the one wronging people.
Yes.
And you have something, it goes back to your childhood. Sometimes when we have patterns of, I would say, destructive habits.
Yes.
Oftentimes it comes from trauma.
Yep.
And maybe that problem feels beyond you and you've tried talking through it.
Yeah.
But maybe there's a point now where you need to get a counselor, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
No,
it's
there's
worth
everything
being
right
free.
with that.
Yeah, it's worth growing through it. If you love others and love yourself, do what's best for them and even for yourself. It's okay to see a counselor.
Yeah, it is.
So if you're in a cycle of sin, and if the first counselor doesn't help, go to another one. And I just say that because I've had times where I've seen a counselor for different issues in my life, and they were great maybe on one issue, but not on another issue. And so find someone who can walk with you through that pain and bring you to the foot of the cross so that you can start to build your toolbox to interact with people differently.
Professional counseling.
Professional counseling.
Professional.
Not people on the side of the street.
Not like me and Brett at the church. We'll pray for you. We'll help you the best we can. But
Right. But there are some issues
I'm
that
not professional.
there are some issues that require just a deeper knowledge of human nature and some real boundaries and protection while you work through those things.
yeah, well, it's a safe place for you and for your loved ones.
Yes.
To work through these things.
Yes.
I'm glad you brought that up,
Yeah.
Heather. That's a good point.
Yeah.
Now, what about if it's not ideal, they're not receptive, you have to move forward? What does that look like? Like, what happens if it's with a spouse or with a family member or a kid?
Right.
I mean, we like to think of coworker immediately, but this happens on every level.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever the situation is, their heart's not willing to hear it.
Yeah.
How do you move forward?
Well, a spouse is really hard.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because obviously
Yeah.
God's heart is not for divorce, right?
Yeah.
And
Right.
so he
Amen.
wants restoration, and you can't go a week or a month without talking to each other and communicating. So
Right.
so the restoration process needs to be I don't know what I'm trying to say, but it needs to be not quick. Quick is the wrong word.
It needs to be prioritized.
Yeah, it needs to be. Thank you.
That's a good way
to
a
say
much
it.
better word.
Yeah.
You need to work through
my
it
brain is muddy.
at selected
Yeah.
times with selected help if necessary.
Yeah, you do. You need to prioritize
Yeah.
it. It needs to be. It can't be pushed off and be like, because there was confrontation and one person didn't quite receive it, they can't
Right.
just go without their lives acting like nothing happened. There needs to
Yeah.
be a priority by saying, I disagree with you, but I'm willing to work through it. And that's where
Yeah.
the counseling and different things can come in,
Yes.
because
Yeah.
marriage, God's heart is that for that to be restored, because you're
Yes.
one. I mean, when you're married, you're
Yeah.
one. And it's like you're being pulled apart, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, when
Yeah.
it comes to relationships, friendships, and things like that, it can be a little bit different, I think,
Yeah.
because you can give a friend a week,
Some
you know,
space.
or 2 weeks or something like
Yeah.
that, and you give them some time. But I think it's just it all comes back to the quote that Heather shared at the very beginning, of my heart is for the restoration. So you need to be
Yeah.
able to go back to that person and be like, hey, let's talk about this again, because I just really love you and care about
Yeah.
you, and I want to see what you've been thinking about, what you've been feeling, so that we can move past this
Yeah.
and move forward and close the book, as you said earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and I also think it's about committing to walk beside one another
yeah.
in
Yeah.
our imperfections. Because a friend of mine who, I can't remember how many years she's been married, but when we had this conversation, she'd been married well over 20 years. And she just said, there comes that point in your marriage where you realize I'm a flawed person and he's a flawed person. And we're both growing. We both love the Lord, but we're both still flawed people.
Yeah.
And so how can we be that safe place for the other person to be the growing person that they are? And
Yeah.
trust God and petition God for the work in our own lives and in the work in their lives. And I know that's something that, I don't know, I just think that's one of those things, and allowing space for people to grow. I know when Mark has allowed me space to just grow and be an imperfect person, it's meant so much.
Yeah.
Rather than just that get it together, which I don't think is what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes things just take a long time.
But and I love what you were saying though, Brett, about prioritizing it, saying like,
Yeah.
hey, this is a big one, and I don't know why I act this way, or I don't know why this is going on.
Yeah.
Can I have the weekend to think about it?
Yeah.
Can I take next week and just think about it? Especially
Yep.
if you're both super busy.
Yep.
Now, I still think that's an ideal outcome to confrontation if the other party is willing to work with you.
Yeah.
But what happens when the other party isn't?
Yep.
Yeah.
We've all been there,
Yep.
where there's almost a separation because of the hardness of heart, which, by the way, is the issue behind divorce. Jesus says, because the hardness of
Yeah.
heart, when there's
Yeah.
on one side or both sides, when there's an unwillingness to work together to restore,
Yeah.
there's an issue. And I think the long view for you and I is first keeping a soft heart, doing all
Yeah.
that you can do to restore it,
Yep.
and then committing it to God's feet,
Lord, yeah.
Yeah.
to the Lord.
Yeah.
And having that hope that someday this will all be
Yeah.
restored, even if
Yeah.
it's in heaven, but choosing to love that person and forgive them now, actively walk that out of my heart every time that bitterness comes up, every time that frustration,
Yep.
choosing to love and actively walk out forgiveness and restoration, you may be surprised what God can do in your lifetime. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? There may be people that come back around years from now,
Yep.
you know?
Yep. Yeah. Where's the passage where it talks about God has ordained good works for us to do? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Ephesians 2:10.
Yes. I think about that. And that's one of my favorite things to pray for just my family and for people that I've maybe struggled in a relationship with, is to pray that God would just bless the good works in their life that that he has for them to do, and that I would cheer them on, right? That my heart would want to see them succeed for the Lord,
Yeah.
and to be happy for them in those things,
Yeah.
which can help when there's that tendency towards bitterness, or when there isn't a reconciliation of relationship and you would long for it, but to keep your heart soft and to think, I want to have a posture of delighting in this person seeking the Lord, and maybe someday there'll be reconciliation there, but
Yeah.
there's not.
Well, because it's so easy to, when you're not right with someone, to want to see them do bad.
Right.
I got to confess, guys, I've struggled with that.
Well, that's
And
the temptation.
That's the temptation. You struggle, you try to make things right, they're unwilling, so then you're offended. And
Yep.
then when there is sin, or maybe it's not even that, because we like to say it's sin. Like the guy who couldn't walk, and the disciples like, whose sin is this?
Right.
And Jesus like, none. It's so I can be glorified. And God's doing that in our lives too. But when we see other people struggling, it's almost easy to be like, thank you, Lord.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Which is so...
And go up to them and be like, I told you so.
Well, not even that, just relishing their downfall. That is so wrong.
Right.
So anti-God.
It is.
His heart. Like, I am to pray for God's mercy and blessing, as you said, Heather, on their life, and to genuinely mean it.
Yeah. And if we see someone stumbling and falling, even if there's someone that we have conflict with, to genuinely have that posture of helping where and how we can.
Yeah.
Not for public notice so that people are like, oh, they were so nice to that person who was so mean to them, but to genuinely have that flow out of our lives, which is purely a work of the Holy Spirit in our hearts.
That's the story of the
Amen,
Good Samaritan.
Exactly.
I mean, the
exactly.
Samaritan
they kind of hated, Jews hated the
they
Samaritans.
each other.
Yeah.
And yet he was willing to not only be there for them, but pay for the hotel and make sure they were taken care of and cleaned them up and stuff. Like that's the heart that we should all have for everyone, not just the people that we think we can get along with.
Yeah.
Well, and I love that story, Brett, because it cost the Samaritan something.
Yeah.
It's costly.
It is costly
to be the one to offer the olive branch. Oftentimes,
it's
it
true.
comes at a personal cost. I
It's
want to,
true.
as we're wrapping up, I want to read this verse to you guys from Proverbs that I love. I love a good Old Testament reference that reveals a New Testament or has a New Testament truth hidden in it. Proverbs, pull this up real quick, 19. And this is what it says, 19:11. The discretion of a man makes him slow to anger, and his glory is to overlook a transgression.
Yeah.
The discretion of a man makes him slow to anger. Wisdom, discernment, discretion, perspective in a man makes him slow to anger when something happens confronting him. And his glory is to overlook a transgression. Now, I've been told that transgression is where someone's crossed the line.
Yep.
Where someone's transgressed against you, they've crossed the line, and yet not overreacting and willing to forgive and overlook it.
Yeah.
And I got to quote Brett on this. Brett has just such wisdom. Brett once told me that if you can forgive it, forgive it.
Yeah.
But if you find that you can't forgive it, you can't let it go, it's lingering with you, you need to sit down and talk with them. Because I was asking you about what's the balance of talking to someone about something when they've wronged you, or what's the balance of forgiving. And I thought that was so wise of you to say, if you can forgive it, if you can just say, Lord, they snapped at me, they have a lot going on, I get it, and just let it go.
Yeah.
Man, that's awesome. But if there's a deeper issue and there's something going on, it's lingering on both sides, then there needs to be a godly confrontation in order to restore, I guess, restore fellowship with one another.
Yeah.
And I don't think we brought it up, but just in like finishing the Matthew 5 passage where Jesus says, if you have something against your brother, before, or if you know that, I guess, if you know that your brother has something against you, rather, before you even worship, before you give gifts to the altar, go and make it right with them, you know? And that's huge to be able to realize, like, man, I need to make things right with someone else. I need to reconcile with someone else. If it is that lingering thing, if it does stir into bitterness or something like that, you know, it's so hard to worship God fully when that's happening. So.
Yeah, that's a sobering reminder. Do we practice that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good podcast.
Yeah.
I felt like we could have gone for another hour and a half.
I'm fresh out.
Are you fresh out, dude? I feel like we're just getting warmed up.
I feel like we've got a couple of good things to add to the podcast list.
I love it. Yeah,
That's true.
Confrontation is such a good one.
Yeah.
And don't ever be afraid to ask someone else to pray for you.
Yeah.
You know, before confronting, and don't go into confrontation without praying first. Saying, Lord, would you soften my heart? Soften their heart. Help me to see their perspective. Help them to see mine. Sometimes you have to pray, Lord, change their heart or change my heart.
Yeah.
you know, and just be willing. And sometimes having a friend, I've done that when I have to confront someone and I'm nervous about it, texting some friends I can trust and say, hey, would you pray for me? Now, don't give them details and be like, I need to go talk to Jimmy about this, you know, and they might be like, well, I'm so glad you were, you know, and that's wrong. That's gossip. But if you're saying, hey, guys, I just have a meeting later. And if they know, saying, hey, me and so-and-so are a meeting later to work through this. Can you pray for us? Or if they don't know, say, I'm meeting with someone to work through some confrontation. Would you just pray for me? You know, letting God in, because God's the game changer. Like, God is able to do the impossible. How often do we go into a situation expecting the worst and come out with the best? Because this is God we're talking about. And God can change hearts and restore us and knit us back to one another. All right, guys, that's all we got time for. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll catch you again on the podcast. God bless.
We hope this topic inspired you in your adventure with the Lord. Stay tuned each week for a new podcast. And if you want to support us, not only can you subscribe to our podcast, but you can also spread the word with other friends or family. Maybe it would also be a blessing to them. Well, until next time, may the Lord bless you.